It's another episode of Mondays with Matt. Matt, today we're going to take on this topic of uncomfortable conversations. It's something we promote very strongly, the client engagements we're involved in, because it's a key part of change. Set this up for us. Why are uncomfortable conversations so important? And maybe I want to ask you after that, just know I'm going to ask you, why do most consulting firms shy away from that?
Sure. Yeah, I think when we think about who we are as humans, we're creatures of habit, where we usually are going to be prone to keeping things as much as possible the same. And
Right.
then also, people are they don't want to rock the boat. And a lot of times, you know, there is times where you need to have conversations that may not feel good, that may not be easy to have. And in order to change, you have to be able to self-reflect through conversation, whether it's for your own internal self or whether it's for someone you're guiding in terms of what they need to do. This uncomfortable conversation will help you reimagine what you're supposed to be really thinking about. If you don't have uncomfortable conversations, nothing really changes because people are not actually addressing the things that we should be addressing.
So, what are some examples of things that need to be addressed? So, let's say I'm a transformative leader. I want to move things to the next level, whether it's technology change or culture change. Where do uncomfortable conversations begin? Like, what even causes an uncomfortable conversation to be had? How do I know it's time to have an uncomfortable conversation?
Yeah, it's a thing that I don't think people realize when it's in front of them. I'll give you an example of something that I encountered early in my professional, not even in my consulting days, in my professional days. My executive director, who managed the registrar's office and everything else, she was leaving the organization. She was retiring. And of course, I was selected by the vice chancellor, to have these conversations. And the first conversations we had was, what do we need to do to change? And I was so young in that days, right? So I was very much like, we have to go do this. We have to do this. Because what I was setting up the conversation for was for the new leader to come in to be able to address some of the things we had. So of course, the vice chancellor, she loved it. She was a brand new vice chancellor. She loved the fact that I said, let's have these conversations because it needs to change with the new executive director. Well, of course, after that meeting, I got a call from the executive director. She brought me into her office and she was really uncomfortable with the fact that I was having a conversation with her boss about the direction we had to go. And my examples were, we have to change these things. That was the first time I realized that the reason my office has never changed, the reason that as a student, my office acted a certain way, the reason that we were there, it was because the executive director didn't want to have those conversations that I was willing to have in front of this new vice chancellor for the opportunity to bring in someone who will lead and drive there. And that's the first time that, Joe, I realized the reason we don't change is nobody wants to talk about what should change. And it's a very uncomfortable conversation to have. And sometimes you have to kind of look at what you're doing and saying, what should we improve? And most people, Joe, don't want to have that conversation because they make themselves feel like they will have egg on their face. It's a reflection on them. And the reality of it is good leaders are always going to think about those things that need to change, the uncomfortable conversations, to bring forth real change on campus.
So, what are some examples of areas where change is required and uncomfortable conversations can facilitate that change?
Yeah. So in higher ed, I would tell you the conversations are where policies and procedures are at a campus that requires faculty members to have a conversation with you. Because a lot of the policies and procedures we are going to either enable or put in front of students come from mandates from the faculty side. whether it's who you're admitting into their college, whether what policies a student has to go through to get into it. So I would say policies and procedures, even from the academic side, impacts us. And so when you're not willing and you're afraid of the politics, you're afraid of having conversations with people that you feel are more authority or are more well liked by the president or whoever, whatever the fear you have, you don't actually make that change. The example, Joe, is that when we had that one school that had all these holds by the department for consent only, no one challenged that, right? And then when we said to the president, 22,000 students paused and didn't come back because you have a consent to enroll. That brought it out to light. But my question is, why did it take that long to do that? It's because they were afraid of faculty. And when we did tell them, hey, why do you have this? It's because they wanted the authority of what they've always done before and is determine who gets into that class. So that worked great when we didn't have technology. Students were at your feet trying to get in, but that's not the world we live in. So we have to think about policies and procedures. That is just one example on when I talk about what needs to change. You have to rethink your policies and procedures for the journeys that you are supporting today, different than when I ran a registrar's office years ago.
So going back to the example at that school where it was clear from the data that there was a significant friction point in the student journey. Students were abandoning and moving on and probably going to other schools or not going to schools at all
Yep.
because of all these holds. We identified it, put it to the attention of senior leadership, but then what? Was it like, okay, go have the conversation? And what were those conversations like? And what was it like to have this quote uncomfortable conversation? And what was the outcome of that? Walk us
Yeah.
through how that played out.
In that case, because we had a president who actually is okay with uncomfortable conversations, is okay with what she always has said to us was have factual conversations, bring the facts out. So we were able to actually show what courses, why the holds, what's the impact of that student. And what the conversation came back from, they didn't trust the prerequisites that were designed in their technology, right? That was the one reason. Plus, they wanted the ability to have some autonomy on how to put them in. So we gave them
Sure.
both. We basically walked them through the prerequisites of the system and asked them what's wrong with them. We went through that exercise. So one, we got them confident about the technology that is already designed, because a lot of people have just had heartache from the previous side, right? And I think the second part is we gave them the autonomy to put people in because we had the ability to put reserve capacity in there. So we gave them 5 seats or 10 seats, whatever they needed. So they allowed them to determine who else can get in there if they felt a student wanted. So we gave them both at that moment. Of course, those consents came off, right? And what happened? We had spike in enrollment. They recognized, oh, that was causing some of it. So I think that's a prime example of when you do look at policy, when you look at the procedure, you have the uncomfortable conversation, you then give them the data points of what it is, and then you start to talk about the conversations of how do I make you comfortable moving forward? What can I make you come? So the uncomfortable conversation should get us to comfortable conversations. And sometimes comfortable conversations is knowing that something isn't going to work exactly the way you are, but that's okay. You're now comfortable with the fact that maybe a cloud product doesn't do it that way, so we're going to do it this way. Like those are the conversations that aren't being had. And the reason that we have seen the past 3 years, 5 years, schools underwater trying to become stable, trying to get their product, to work for them, is because they're having the conversations. And I would say even then, even after go live, they're not having uncomfortable conversations. They're just trying to fix what they're trying to do. Uncomfortable conversations make you think, what are you doing today? Is that right for my institution? Is that right for my students? Is that right for the future of this campus? And those are the conversations I think that are really important.
So then why aren't, I know you kind of moved into that implementation phase, right? When big technology is being put in. Isn't it the role of the consultant or the system integrator or whoever the vendor is that's brought in? Isn't it their job then to be having these uncomfortable conversations early to say, look, our system won't do that. So here's what we have to change, but they don't. And then all the challenges happen later. So why aren't those conversations being had? Or are they being had from the consultant, but then the leaders who are hearing it don't want to have the conversation with their people and it dies there? Where's the break? Is it the consultant to executive sponsor and consultant to project director conversation that's broken? Or is it the project director to everybody else saying, hey, we're going to have to change and here's how we're going to have to change? Let's have the uncomfortable conversation.
It's a combination of all of them. And I will give you a little bit of examples on each one of them a little bit. Everything is driven by the fear. Like just the word fear is the reason why people don't want to have the conversation. So a vendor selling a license has a fear that their license will not be sold if you have the conversations about the things that that campus really has to do. It's going to cost them investment in time to make those
Right.
changes. That fear comes in from a vendor's perspective when they're selling the license because they fear that if they tell them, hey, you're going to need to look at your policies, you need to look at your procedures, you're going to need to spend some time. They also have the fear, the vendor, is that the license will be delayed in the sell, that the school will not
Too much pre-work, basically.
too
Too
much
much.
pre-work. They're afraid of that, right? So that's the first part, right? So that there is that issue, and we should address that. The issue is you should not be driven by the vendor's timeline. You should be driven by what really is the best for your campus, and that is to revisit some of your procedures, align it, and drive it. All the things that we talk about pre-work is the number one reason why. And look, and I ran a student practice that put in these softwares. I left that because I knew we were not doing the right thing in terms of the pre-work, and that's why Beyond is built. Now, the second part is the consulting, right? The consultants are fearful. One, they have to follow they're certified by the
Methodology.
vendor, and the vendor saying, oh, don't go telling the client that they need to do pre-work because you're going to delay our work, right? And then there's a fear that if they delay the work, right, they themselves as a consulting group may not get that work because they may
Because
not be
it's longer timeline, potentially more budget, and therefore they could get priced out.
they could get priced out. It's a little bit of that. It could be that the consulting firm also has fear that if this project doesn't start, my 10 consultants are going to be sitting on the bench. There's a fear of that,
So it's a
right?
profitability thing. Okay.
The profitability thing. And if you tell them, hey, you got to do pre-work, you got to figure out what else to do with the 10 people, right? So it's a utilization element of it. I'm just giving you a couple of these things. There's tons more behind this, right? The third one is the client themselves. They're fearful to have the conversation. One, they're looking for the easy button. Remember, they came to the vendor because they have a problem. And they are telling the president and their board and whoever they're reporting, it's not us. It's not us. It's the software.
It's the technology. Yeah.
Technology. So they're afraid to have the conversations with them, with the leaders to say, you know what, we've been doing this wrong. We have a registrar's office that doesn't operate as effectively as possible. We need to reimagine what they do in terms of it. Or we have our financial aid packaging or our financial aid area is at risk and we haven't changed it. So we're going to go buy these software. So instead of having the conversations about really thinking about what your office is really doing, they're afraid that it's going to be negative. Just like that executive director. She was not really upset at me for saying it. She was upset that I said it to her boss, which wasn't going to be her boss anyways, right? That was the thing I
Right. She
couldn't
was
understand.
leaving. Yeah.
She was leaving. But to her, it was egg on her face that Matt gave all these points out because the vice chancellor compliment her about the fact that Matt was able to articulate all the good things, but she recognized that, oh my God, this is egg on my face because Matt is having the uncomfortable conversations with my vice chancellor. Now, I had really good relationships with that vice chancellor after that because she knew I was willing to say, hey, our baby's ugly. Let's go do something better with this, right? So that's the third. And then the fourth is there's these uncomfortable conversations among all three because each of them are kind of like treading water the same way. They all need to get there, but they're not actually talking about the uncomfortable conversations about what failure is about to loom in front of them. They're going to go spend a lot of money. They're going to be underwater. A return on investment isn't there. All three of them all know it, Joe. But the fear,
But
the
yeah, in their mind, they're weighing the cost of the uncomfortable conversation and somehow sensing that the cost of that is way higher than the cost of just, hey, let's just get through the next 30 days. Let's just get to go live. We'll deal with it later. We'll deal with it in post production, or the next manager will deal with it if if it's nothing to do with technology. It's the manager who says, look, it's fine right now. Yes, it's inefficient. Yes, it's slow. Yes, student journey sucks. Yes, it's terrible for staff because they don't have the information they need, but it's not so broken that I need to fix it, because in order to fix it, I'm going to have these uncomfortable conversations, which may make me unpopular, right? I may look bad. So the fear of looking bad or not being the hero for 10 minutes probably causes them to say, yeah, you know what? That's for someone else. That's a battle for someone else to fight, so to speak.
yeah, when I hear this is one of the things that whenever I hear someone say, we are going to go put someone on this project to lead it who is about to retire, you right away know that nothing is really going to change. Because one, they're not going to live for the change, meaning that's not inside of there. And that's one of the biggest red flags that I see is that when you put someone in that seat that isn't going to own the change that they're in, they won't have uncomfortable conversations because they're just trying to get it cut over
Go
so they
live
can
and yeah.
be live and be done, right? And let someone else deal with it afterwards. Well, just think about this, Joe. How many of these projects the CIO leaves either before, a little bit after, and they're gone? Why? Because they probably don't want to have the conversations that they should have had. And you know what? And now they're at another place before the egg is on their face that something didn't go right.
Right. And then the new incoming CIO in this case is the one who's having to clean up the mess, right? Fred and I just had that conversation in Fridays with Freddie about when you come into a new role and you have to inherit all this nonsense, it's because the person before you wasn't bold enough and wasn't willing to have those uncomfortable conversations with staff and peers and everybody else. So they just kind of kicked the can down the road, and now it's on you. So, kind of in closing, Matt, then what advice do you have for a leader listening who goes, yeah, you know what? Our institution can be accused of having put off these conversations, kick the can down the road, but we can't keep doing that. We've got to have these conversations. Where do I go from here? What do you
Yeah.
recommend?
Yet part of being a leader is guiding your team through conversations that make everyone think twice about what they're doing today and understand it. Just it's no different than when we do our P3S2 friction points and everything else, right? We're looking at things that have caused friction points. So I would say to a leader is you have to bring the team together um, and start to have conversations about the imagine ifs is a good way of saying it, where the uncomfortable conversations start, right? Imagine if we can do this, right? So that's probably the way you can start
You
it.
mean visioning for
Visioning.
like how would this be, what's the better way this could be happening? What's
Exactly.
the better way this policy could have been drafted or this procedure could be happening?
So, and that's the first element. That's probably a good positive way of saying what to do. But the next step, in order to do that, is what is going to hold us back from getting there? That second conversation, Joe, is always uncomfortable because
Mm-hmm.
it could be that we don't have enough resources. It could be that the person leading that area as
Is resistant to
unfortunate,
change. Yeah.
is resistant to change, or isn't capable, or isn't the right, doesn't have the right mindset, right? You have to figure out the right conversations about that. Imagine if, and then what are the things that are holding you back, where it starts the conversation about, "Well, we should think about that," right? We're not going to solve it there, but we're putting it on the table that it needs to be addressed. And then the third is, what is the friction points that is currently getting in the way of the imagine ifs that we want to get to? What can we do to reduce the barriers of that process in order to get to our imagine if, right? I would say, as a leader, you're not leading by title. You're leading by change. You're leading by direction. And that title is given to you because you need to lead. And leaders need to make tough decisions, need to be able to think through it. And then you got to get people behind you or next to you, as I say, to want to go in that same direction. Then you're not really saying, "Oh, Joe, you're not doing well." No, we are doing this together so that we could get to this journey together well, right? And I think that's the big driver that we always see, is how do we do this collaboratively and have those conversations? And I think we normally see people having a hard time self-reflecting, Joe. I mean, there's times, Joe, I say things and you disagree with me. I have to self-reflect and be like, yeah, he's actually kind of right. That isn't Matt's best role. And that's okay. That's an uncomfortable conversation I have to go through with myself or with you. It's a conversation we do better at when we have those conversations. Beyond is built on conversations like this. We started from the beginning to say, we're not going to go do consulting 1.0. If you are, stay in your old firms, don't come here. We're doing 4.0, which makes you think differently, makes you
Yeah.
think about uncomfortable conversations.
So then, in summary, I would say that every leader listening who feels like there's change ahead, which requires uncomfortable conversations and moving people to a different place than what their old muscle memory is at, there has to be a why, right? You have to begin with a why, which is kind of what you've hinted to, and
Yep.
get people behind that why and excited about that why, because you as a leader know that at some point they're going to be uncomfortable. They're not going to want to change. And you have to remind them of the why so that they do move. And then some small wins, right? Get the little wins. What are the small wins that build up towards the big change ahead? Don't try and eat the elephant in one bite. Try and take some small bites at it. And then you'll start to see people move. This president that you're talking about, we're in our third year working with them. And the first year, you tell people all the time, it was tough. We were not liked on that campus because we represented so much change. But now, a year in, year and a half in, after a bunch of wins, 2 years in, people were hungry. Like, hey, can you come work with my department? Hey, can you come work with my team? Because they saw the outcome of a strong leader saying, no, we're doing this. We're going to stay on course, no matter how uncomfortable it gets, because in this case, the student is that important, right? So that's me summarizing before you give some closing thoughts of
Yeah.
hopefully the picture in people's mind should be you as a leader have to cast a vision and stay the course and have strong people guiding the process.
Yeah. The why, in many cases, the past 5 years, past 3 years, past 10 years, has been, why do we need to change to a technology to improve the processes that we have today, right? That's the why of why people are doing what they do. And hence, they put in a new software. And I'm not against putting in a new software, because the conversation needs to have is, what are the things that we need to do to make this campus more effective, to serve more effective? There's a set of whys that need to be understood. And those whys are different than when I ran a campus or in the past 5, 10 years. We have changed. We have to serve differently. The why is different. And those whys then will drive you to a better technology pick, a better set of activities that need to happen before the technology comes in. When you're putting in $10 million and you're expecting it to do the same thing you've always done, I don't know if there's any value to that. Just ask yourself that question. I'm going to do $10 million and I'm going to do the same thing I did last year.
How
Is that
silly.
a win? It is not a win, right? And that's an uncomfortable conversation that people should have today, because that's what people are signing the dot on. Oh, we're going to go spend money, millions, 10 million, 40 million, 100 million, and we're going to do what we did last year, right? Let's think about that.
Yeah. So a very simple question would be, if we're going to make this 10 million, 20 million, $100 million investment, what are the 10, 20, 50 things that are going to change about
Yep.
what we do and how we do it? And if you can't list 10, 20, 50 things that are going to be radically different in policies, procedures, systems, structures, what a total waste of money. Just
Yeah.
optimize your current system. So much more to say about that, Matt. We're out of time, but thanks. I think you've planted the right seeds in people's minds, especially in the leaders who are maybe right on the edge of stepping outside their comfort zone to really start pushing. Now's the time to push. Your institution probably needs it. Our industry certainly needs it. We need more leaders boldly pushing those uncomfortable conversations, because that's where the real change comes from.
Yeah. And I think people respect you when you have uncomfortable conversations, when you
Exactly
have
right.
transparent conversations. People around you will recognize, oh, that's a leader.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Matt. And we'll see you
Happy
all next
holidays.
time.